Hi, my name's Mel and welcome back to Bookish Brummy. For those of you that have been here before, you'll notice that my background has changed. So I'm pretty sure having a nice bookcase full of my Stephen King books is a much nicer background than a blank white wall. And also it means that it's freed up some bookshelf space for me on my other main bookcase, and it means I can keep this one dedicated to Stephen King. Obviously I've got two extra things on there that are not Stephen King, but I just think they look pretty, so I'll leave them there on display. So for today's video, I'm pre-filming this ready for Saturday morning because I'm not able to film my normal weekly update on what I would read on Friday night after I finish work because I have stuff to do this week. So instead we're going to do that update next Monday, so it'll just be a few days later. But I did still want to put a video out, and I thought I've read so many books this year. I've now read nearly 130 books this year, and I've had some really good reads, so I wanted to talk about my top 5 books this year that are not Stephen King. Now obviously if I could do a Stephen King version of this video, and I probably will, but I didn't want to put him in this mix today because I talk about Stephen King a lot and I have a lot of summary videos, and I'm very keen on his work, so he would probably dominate. So I thought I would leave Stephen King out of this and talk about other authors that I've really enjoyed reading this year, because you might find something in here that interests you, or you may have read these books yourself and want to add to the discussion. So yeah, I've gone with 5. I could have picked more. I mean, I've read a lot of 5-star reads this year, and I'm just going to sort of caveat this as well. Whilst these are probably my 5 favourite non-Stephen King books, not included in this pile was Anne Rice's Interview with the Vampire, because I've spoken at length about that, published a video on Wednesday, which was about 45 minutes long, doing a deep dive summary into Interview with the Vampire. And I also talked about it in my Halloween weekly roundup. So I said quite a lot about that. So this is talking about books that I have read before I started my channel, but within this last year. So the way I'm going to do this is not in order of likability, because I like all of these books. I'd rate all of these at least 5-star, and you know, I think a couple of them, and I'll say when I get to them, I'd even give a 6 if I could. But I'm going to talk about them in their order of publication. So the first one I'm going to talk about is a book called Valley of the Dolls by Jacqueline Susann. Now this was published in 1966, so it's 59 years old. And I found this just when I was perusing the shelves at Waterstone earlier this year and thought, oh, that looks interesting, let's have a read of it. And it's normal contemporary fiction. It's not literary fiction, it's not thriller or anything like that. It's just normal contemporary fiction, which is almost like a romance as well at the same time. And I've read reviews on this, and some people absolutely love it and some people really don't care for it at all. But I found myself to be hooked. I devoured this in the space of about 3 days. You know, it's not a short book, but it's not a very long one either. But it was an easy read and it was really enjoyable. So the story starts in 1945 with a lady called Anne Wells. Now I don't entirely know exactly how old she is, but I think she is probably around about 20, 21, and she's just moved to New York City from a small town where essentially in the small town women would leave school and their career would be as a housewife. And she really didn't want that. She wanted to be in the big city, she wanted to live the big city life, and she wanted to, you know, have her own career for a bit and make her own money. So it starts off with essentially she is at a job interview, and she has this job interview with a guy called Henry Bellamy, and he works as a sort of lawyer for the theatre business, actors and actresses and stuff, but he's also kind of like an agent. He does like this in between, you know. And he says to her at the beginning, you know, you're not just going to be a secretary, like I need far more from you. Like if I say jump in the middle of the night and go and see an actress or an actor, that's what you have to do. And she's like, yeah, sure. So she gets on board with that, and pretty early on while she's looking for housing, she then meets our second character in this, who's called Neely. Now Neely is around about the same age, I think, and she is a singer, and she's been singing since she was about 7 years old. And she wants to make a career of it, and she's not had much luck at the start of this book. She was in like a family trio, and then they betrayed her, and they signed a contract that excluded her, so she's now trying to make it on her own. So it starts off with essentially Anne and Neely, you know, living the big city life, trying to make it in the entertainment industry, and then they come across a lady called Jennifer North, who I think is a little bit older, maybe a couple of years older than these two, but she's already an established actress. And she's very famous, but a lot of what happens in this book with regards to her career, they constantly mention, you know, it's because of her beauty, she's so beautiful. And that's what basically opens the doors for her, which is a bit of a shame because it just sort of shows, like, you know, people weren't necessarily looking at her talent and more about what she looked like, but that put a lot of pressure on her. So all three of these ladies are young, they're trying to make their way, you know, and it goes from like 1945 and it goes on for at least 10 years, so you move through a decade. And this is like in the post-war era as well, and it has a very Mad Men feel about it, I think, but from a women's point of view. And the dolls are not the ladies, they're actually referring to prescription drugs, so like uppers and downers. And apart from Anne, Neely and Jen, they take these uppers and downers quite frequently to regulate their days, to get through their days. So they use them for weight loss and divorce. They have like certain breakdowns as they're going through their life, and they have so much pressure on them from their jobs as well. And even one of the characters in this actually has to take a break from work because all these prescription drugs are sort of getting in the way and screwing her over a bit, but arguably she's taking all of these because she can't necessarily cope with the life that as it currently is for her, and also in the industry that she's sort of chosen to work in. And I just really enjoyed this book. I thought that it was well, it's very sad in some bits, but it's also, to me, like an earlier version, I think, of like Sex and the City, but with 3 characters, if you were going to put that into a book. And it's really easy read, and I just really enjoyed it. So yeah, would definitely give this one a 5-star. It's sort of contemporary fiction with a bit of romance, and if you liked Mad Men as well, you kind of like that sort of atmosphere, that's sort of what's given off in this book, so you might definitely enjoy this if you enjoyed Mad Men. Okay, so the next one I'm going to talk about was actually published in 2005. So it's called Never Let Me Go by Kazuo Ishiguro. So this is classed as speculative fiction, so it's dystopian. And we are basically following a character called Kathy, and it starts off with her being age 31. And she's looking back on her life, so it starts off sort of at 31, but then it jumps back into her childhood when she's at boarding school. And the reason that she's doing this introspection on her life is because her life might not be for much longer, but she knows that, and she's been brought up to sort of know that. So she has basically been coming to terms with the fact that she won't live to a ripe old age from actually quite a young age. So she's sort of discussing in her earlier years as she's sort of going through boarding school and then going through college and then starts beginning the training for the job that she does, about how this idea was socialised to her that she would die young. And I'm not going to go into the why she's going to die young, because that might spoil the story a bit. Some synopsises do talk about it, others don't. It doesn't talk about it on the back of this book about the actual reason why. But I think what I enjoy about this book was it really throws up some moral questions about science for when you're using human beings in science to benefit other human beings and extend their lives. There's definitely some moral and ethical questions about that. So there's that. I also just really enjoy the way that it's written. Kazuo Ishiguro has a really nice writing style. It's really easy to read, but it's just really beautiful. And it flows quite easily. I mean, this book is not really that much more than 300 pages, I don't think. So it doesn't take too long to read. I believe there was a film of this as well that Keira Knightley was in. I haven't seen the film, but if any of you have, I would recommend that you probably come back and read the book as well, just because it's so nicely written. And actually Kazuo Ishiguro did win the Nobel Prize for Fiction, not just based on this book, but based on all of the books that he has written. And I've read a couple more of his as well, so I'd say he's a very good writer. But this book is sort of classed as like one of his best out of his backlog of books that he's done. So yeah, I really enjoyed this, and I would definitely recommend it. This is one of the ones that I would give him like 6 stars if I could. Okay. So the next book I'm going to talk about was published in 2022, and it is Demon Copperhead by Barbara Kingsolver. So I already mentioned this a couple of times on my channel, but I haven't really gone into any details about it. But it was the Women's Prize for Fiction 2023 winner. I can totally see why it totally deserves that award. This is actually the first of my 5-star reads that I read this year, and this is another one that I would give a 6-star if I could. And essentially, we follow Demon, who lives in the South Appalachian mountains of Virginia, and what I had not realised is in that area there is a big opioid crisis, or there was a big opioid crisis going on, and this is what this book is sort of delving into. So that was something that I had to go and look at after I finished the book. So you don't need to know about it in order to enjoy the book, but I think it sort of helps to understand where the author is trying to come from as to why she's written this story. And we essentially follow Demon from the moment he's born. He is the voice, the narrator of the story, if you like. So we follow him from the moment he's born, you know, up until the end. Not so he you know, not till he dies or anything, but just until he's sort of grown and responsible for himself. And what this story is sort of going through is how substance abuse has affected his life in so many ways, and also the lives of all the people that are involved with him. So, you know, his mother is a drug addict, and so that has affected him even before he was born. It then continues to affect him through his childhood, and obviously social services get involved, and he ends up going through the foster system. So this also has a bit of a discussion, I think, about the foster system, and, you know, how Demon actually survives in that. He has his best friend who he lives next door to, called Maggot, and Maggot's parents, Mr. and Mrs. Peggott, are not really his parents, they're like his grandparents, and they're raising him. And the Peggotts are sort of the saving grace to Demon. Unfortunately, they can't take him on as well, so he is very much alone in the world. There is nobody that he can trust, and every time something good seems to happen for him, something terrible then seems to sort of try and take it away from him. And you become very invested in Demon, and you really want him to do well, and you really want all the people in his life to be well. But consequently as well, having suffered in a childhood where drugs played such a large role in, you know, his life and the lives of the people who was looking after him, he then himself struggles with his own drug addiction at one point. The people that he chooses to date, he now gets a saviour complex, and wants to save them as well. And then there's other people in his life, like Aunt June, who again, she's a good egg. She tries to do her best for Demon, but her daughter is also suffering from a terrible opioid addiction, and she's trying to deal with that. So you are seeing how not only how drugs are affecting Demon, but how they affect the parents of somebody who's got a child who's a drug addict, how they affect the child of somebody who's got a parent who's a drug addict, how it affects like adult relationships, and the grandparents as well. So you really getting a look at just how everybody is affected. And it sounds like a really sad novel, and in a way it is. There's a lot of sadness in this novel, but Demon, who's narrating this for us, he has quite a dark sense of humour, and I think, you know, that is what sort of kept me going in this novel, and it sort of made me want to bat for him and be like, come on, I really want this to work out for him. So I'm not going to let you know if it does work out for him. You'll have to read the novel to find that out. But I really recommend it, and again, the way it's written, it's just so well written, and the sense of humour in this is really, really good. I read the opening to it and I was just hooked in straight away. Now I have also listened to the audiobook of this, and I thought that the narrator for the audiobook did a really, really good job. So that's also an option if you wanted to listen to the audio instead of read, or maybe you want to do both at the same time, but I do recommend the audio. And I had heard a bit of the audio before I started reading the book, and the narrator's voice, who was doing Demon, then crept into my head while I was actually reading this. So I think when I was reading this, I actually had his voice now cemented as canon as Demon's voice, which is fine because he did a good voice. Now, I'd also say about this one, this is kind of like a modern day retelling of David Copperfield by Charles Dickens. I've never read David Copperfield, so I couldn't personally do the comparison, but that's what I've heard a lot of people saying. But I enjoyed this so much, it does make me want to go back to read Demon David Copperfield by Charles Dickens. I think it would be a worthwhile read. I have read some Charles Dickens in the past and I did actually find him quite good. So and I do believe David Copperfield's quite a big one though, so I may have probably steered clear of that, but now I have read this, it does sort of inspire me to go and want to try that one. So again, yeah, as I said, this is another one that I would have given 6 stars to if I could. Really, really enjoyed it, and it's well worth the award that it won. So the next book I'm going to talk about was published in 2024. So it is The Women by Christian Hannah. I have seen quite a few people talking about this, and that's because this book has a lot of merit. So this starts off in 1967, so it's historical fiction, and we are following a lady called Frankie McGrath, who again is very, very young. She's just left school, so I believe she's probably about 19 or 20 in this novel. And it's set during the war with Vietnam, and she is from South California, and her brother Finley has already gone off to fight the war in Vietnam, and she had a really close relationship with him and they used to talk to each other a lot, and she really, really misses him. And again, she wants to do something to contribute to the war effort. She feels like, you know, just sitting at home doing nothing is not doing me any good, but she also wants to make her parents proud. And her father has this wall of photos in his office, which is a wall of heroes, and she really wants him to respect her and see her as a hero as well. So she decides to try and sign up as a nurse, because she's a trained nurse, so she decides, I'm going to sign up as a nurse to go and help with the war effort in Vietnam. Now, she tries to go through the Navy and she tries to go through the Air Force, and they tell her that she doesn't have enough experience and they won't have her. But when she goes to the army, then they say, yeah, you can complete your basic training and we will ship you out at the beginning of the year. So she goes home to tell her parents that she has enlisted, and on that very evening that she tells them that, they get word that her brother Finley has been killed in combat. So her parents do not want her to go. They don't want her to go anyway. They do not think a woman should be fighting in the war, and they also now don't want to lose the only child that they have left, which is her. But she said, no, I've made a commitment, I've enlisted. So in January of 1967, she then gets sent out to her first posting in Vietnam, and it goes on from there. So she obviously witnesses some horrific things the moment that she gets there. You know, she's exposed to some terrible, terrible injuries. I think it's really written really well to describe the environment that she's in and the sounds that she's hearing, and just how alien it is from the comfort and security that she has been used to out in South California. And then obviously there's the friendships that she makes while she's on her posting, and she has a couple of different postings while she's out doing her bit on the front, and so she makes a couple of different friends across there. But all in all, you know, all of these postings, like, these absolutely horrendous things, but it's also, you know, she finds herself, she becomes an extremely self-sufficient person. She is much stronger than she ever gave herself credit for, you know, and she has a lot to be proud of herself for what she has done. And this is where the discussion became quite shocking for me, I think, in the book that shone a light for me, was that then she obviously returns to come back home, and all of a sudden she's not accepted. People do not view women as having played any decent part in the Vietnam War. She just wasn't recognised. The men were seen as heroes and veterans, but she was not even considered to be a veteran, even though she had been right on the firing line. Her life had been in danger several times when bombs had been dropped, you know, pretty much on the location where she was, and she is as much a hero as anybody else, but the country doesn't seem to see that, and neither do her parents. Her father refuses to put her on the wall of heroes, and if anything, her parents act like they're ashamed of her. Consequently as well, like when she tries to get help for things like PTSD, she's turned away and told these groups are only for veterans, and she's trying to say, but I am a veteran. And they're like, no, you're a woman, you couldn't afford there. And people actually denied the fact that women had been on the front in Vietnam in the first place to begin with, which is very frustrating for her. So it's sort of, that in itself, I think Christian Hannah had probably done a lot of research into that. I'd not been aware of anything about denying women a place as a veteran or as a hero for having to go through, you know, war situation like she had. And then, you know, it talks about, you know, the petitioning that they did to get women noticed for their achievements during the Vietnam War, or really in any war, because it wasn't even recognised, the women who had, again, nursed in people in World War II and things like that. They'd just been completely ignored, to be honest, and she wanted to bring a light on that. But also with our character, she struggles to fit back into civilian life. And it's really detailed, I think, like her struggle essentially with PTSD, accepting the world that she's come back to, you know, and even just lying in bed at night in the quiet is extremely difficult for her. And I think that Christian Hannah has written a really, really beautiful novel in The Women. I read that one, I think, in about April time this year, and it's just really, really stuck with me. And it's the first novel of hers I've ever written. I'd really look forward to reading some more of hers. But definitely would recommend that one as a read. It's very, very insightful, and again, it's one of these ones that you feel like you want to go and do your own research on the actual situation that it's talking about after the fact. So, okay, and now the fifth novel that I'm going to recommend was published a week ago on the 6th of November, and it's called The Matchbox Girl by Alice Jolly, and this is a really beautiful copy that I've got. Now, I haven't just read this in the last week, I read this in September, because I got mine through Goldsboro Books. It was in the subscription package, and for some reason we got it earlier than when it was actually officially released to the public. But I really enjoyed this book, and I thought I was going to. So essentially in this one, this is set during World War II. So again, we're in the 1940s. And what we're talking about here is we're following Adelaide, I think is how you'd say her name, and she is living in Austria, in Vienna. And it starts off when she is a child, and then it sort of follows her into adulthood. And essentially Adelaide is different from Adelheid. I think it's Adelheid, yeah. She's different from other children, so her parents take her to a hospital and want her sort of looked at and tested, and it never explicitly says through this book that she is autistic, but that's essentially where it's going. So she also doesn't speak to anybody, she is mute, but she is also the narrator of this book, so it's narrated like what she's thinking in her head. Now, I saw criticisms come out about this book on Goodreads when I think the first like subscription people had got it, like me, and people were saying that the language was really difficult to understand in this book. And I do admit at the beginning it can be quite confusing in the way that Adelaide's brain seems to be processing stuff and how it's sort of written, because she's using words to mean other things than what they actually are, and it's a bit confusing. It's almost like a code, I think, but then if you just give it a chance and you get, you know, beyond about 50 pages, it starts to make sense. And I think that you have to read the book thinking this is not being narrated by, you know, an outside voice who's talking about Adelaide. This is from Adelaide's point of view, and she processes and sees the world differently to a neurotypical person. And once I sort of got my head around that, I actually really appreciated the fact that this was written in this style, because I think it gave more weight to the story, and it made you more sympathetic to Adelaide, and obviously the problems that she had with the problems that she was suffering, and the fact that she was non-verbal at all. So in this hospital where she is being assessed, we have a doctor called Dr. Asperger. Now again, like, the word autism isn't really used, but we can see that Dr. Asperger is trying to categorise different levels of autism, if you like, but I don't think he didn't at the time have a set criteria to describe autism, but he kept coming across different case studies, and he was trying to collect all of this data together for his PhD, so he could come up with a framework, if you like, for autism to describe autism and categorise the different levels of autism. So clearly what he's doing, and you get that from various conversations that he has with other staff in the hospital, but the word Asperger's or autism is not specifically said. And also, it's pertinent to mention that in Dr. Asperger's studies, he's only studying the boys. So whilst he realises that Adelaide has differences between her and other children, at that time they weren't really classing that little girls or girls could suffer with autism. So she's never actually really included in any of his case studies on the matter, which we know today is obviously not the case, and obviously women do have autism, myself included, which is why I actually really enjoyed this book, and I really liked the fact that Alice Jolly used that as a subject matter. So for me, yeah, it was to follow the Adelaide character and sort of like what she was going through while he was doing that study was quite interesting. And I think Alice Jolly, I think she's a historian, let me just check. No, she's not a historian. She has a creative writing master's at Oxford University, but she obviously did a lot of research before writing this book. The other part of the book that is interesting for me is that this is obviously set in Austria and it's during World War II. And I've never really considered what the general public in Austria were doing during World War II or what they felt. And actually, you know, there's like a resistance going on there, and then there's bombs falling, and then there's obviously the war is going on. And it does talk about the characters' feelings, you know, the characters in this book's feelings towards all of those things, which I found to be, again, very interesting because it's not something that I've ever thought of. So it's quite a an interesting setting, obviously, to set this story, which is why it's again, this is classed as historical fiction. And obviously there are fictive elements in this. I don't know if Adelaide was a real person or not. She probably wasn't. But I can't really say like the end of the story because I don't want to ruin it. But what I would say is the subject matter in this, if you are somebody who wants to sort of read a little bit into a character who is neurodiverse, this book is really good for that. You just have to bear in mind that the voice of the person is neurodiverse, and that's how it's coming across. And I think that it's really important to note in that, and this is what makes the book for me actually, is that she chose the kind of language that she did for this, because it was kind of like, you know, we talk a lot today about, you know, neurodiverse people having the same opportunities and fitting into society in the same way that neurotypical people do, but then sometimes we say that and then we expect the neurodiverse person to change so that they match the neurotypical person, which is obviously incredibly difficult to do. So I think that if this had been written from, you know, a neurotypical narrator talking about a neurodiverse person, I don't think it would have had the same impact. And I think actually what the writer is forcing all of the readers to do, they're forcing them to communicate in the way that Adelaide wants to communicate, how she as a neurodiverse girl and then woman wants to communicate. And that's why I would really commend Alice Jolly for this book, and why it really ranks high with me. It's definitely a 5-star read. And I would look forward to anything else that she would write. So those are the 5 books that I wanted to talk about today, because I thought that they were all fantastic reads, and I'm happy to recommend them all and actually have the opportunity to talk about them as well. I did want to talk about The Matchbox Girl before. I think in my opening video when I opened the channel I said that I had read it and I really enjoyed it, but just not really had the opportunity to bring it up in a video and talk about it. So let me know, have you read any of these 5 books? Did you enjoy them, or maybe you didn't enjoy them? If you didn't enjoy them, just let me know. But yeah, please let me know if you want to react to anything I've said in this video down in the comments below. And also, if you think that any of these authors have written any other books that are 5-star, or maybe you'd want to give a 6-star and you'd really want to recommend them, then let me know, because I'm now, you know, quite open to these authors having read this batch of work often. So the next video will be on Monday, where we will talk about the books that I've read in the last week, and I'll be doing a short review on those. So I hope you've enjoyed this video, and I look forward to seeing you soon. Bye!